Today we're going to cover 3 chapters. 3 chapters in Genesis. We're going to do it. And I sent out my e-news on Friday, and I asked you to prepare in advance to read these 3 chapters ahead of time. And maybe some of you did, and maybe some of you didn't. You'll have an opportunity. You can read them later this afternoon or maybe sometime this week. And we're going to do something a little bit different this morning. I'm not going to read the chapters in their entirety. I'm just going to summarize the story within these chapters. If you've been around the church for a while, you're probably familiar with these stories. So I'm going to summarize the stories. I'm going to point out a few interesting tidbits from the text as we go, and then I'm going to give you some lessons that I learned from these stories. And then maybe at the end of the service, I'll give you an opportunity to share your thoughts as well. So be prepared. Here we go. Genesis 29. We're going to start in Genesis 29. Jacob's on the run because of his deception. We talked about that the past couple of weeks. And he's on the run. He's taken off to his mother Rebekah's family's relatives in Haran. He's hoping to find a wife while he's at it. And so he comes to a well, and here comes Rachel to the well to draw some water for her sheep. And so Jacob kind of shows off a little bit, flexes his muscles, and rolls the stone away from the entrance to the well and waters Rachel's sheep. Just like his mother Rebekah watered the camels of the servant. You remember that several weeks ago? If you've been around in the series, Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. And Rebekah is at the well, and she waters the servant's camels. This could possibly be the same well. We're not really sure. So Jacob finds his mother Rebekah's relatives, but this isn't necessarily going to be a pleasant family reunion. Maybe you know the story, you know what's coming. Jacob meets his uncle Laban, his mother's brother, and in verses 13 and 14 we read this: as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." And so over the next 3 chapters, we're going to see the resemblance. We're going to see that Jacob is his uncle Laban's own flesh and blood, and he's like him in so many ways. Could it be that Jacob, the deceiver, has finally met his match? So Jacob falls in love immediately with Uncle Laban's daughter, Rachel, his younger daughter. And after working for a month for his uncle, Laban offers to pay Jacob for his service, and Jacob agrees to work for 7 years for his daughter, Rachel, for her hand in marriage. Laban agrees. Verse 20. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seem like only a few days to him because of his love for her. How romantic. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." Maybe not so romantic after all. Maybe not. So they have the wedding ceremony, along with a big feast, a big celebration, and afterwards, Jacob takes her into his tent to consummate the marriage. Remember, it's probably dark out. She's probably been veiled the entire time. Jacob is probably a little bit drunk from the big celebration that they just had, which explains what happened next. When morning came, there was Leah, not Rachel. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" The deceiver has been deceived. Just like Jacob masqueraded as his brother Esau, Leah now masquerades as her sister Rachel. Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." And Jacob knows all about that firstborn stuff, right? We've been talking about that over the past couple of weeks. But it's not in his favor this time. I mean, Jacob got what he wanted by deceiving his father into giving the blessing to the secondborn himself instead of the firstborn. Now Jacob is deceived by receiving the firstborn instead of the second, which is not what he wants. You following me here? In the end, Laban agrees to give Rachel in marriage to Jacob in exchange for another 7 years of labor, but this time he doesn't have to wait the full 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So they're married. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And we see that this family favoritism runs in the family. And it's a hurtful kind of favoritism, as we'll see. We'll see this favoritism later on as well. Over the next several verses and into the next chapter, we see a competition to get Jacob's attention by having children. And the text indicates that God meets Leah. God meets Leah, the unlovely and the unloved, in her despair. God meets her in her despair. And she has 2 children. She names them Reuben and Simeon. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. He has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. The Lord has seen me, and the Lord has heard me. God has seen, God has heard. And this should take us back to the story of Hagar several weeks ago, if you were here. You know, Hagar, this is what she discovered of God as well. You know, Hagar, Abraham and Sarah's slave, you know, that God pursued her, and God heard her, and God saw her in the midst of her despair when she was mistreated by Abraham and Sarah. And so we continue to see with Leah that she has 2 more kids. She has Levi, from whom comes the priestly line of the Israelite people. And then she has Judah, the great ancestor of King David, the great ancestor of the King of Kings, Jesus, the Messiah, from Leah, the unloved. Into the next chapter, the drama continues. Verse 1, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Give me children or I will die. And so she gives Jacob her servant Bilhah to sleep with in order to have children through her. And Jacob's like, "Sure, why not? I'll take one for the team." They have 2 children from Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah, she wants her servant to get on the action. And so Jacob sleeps with her servant, Zilpah. And Gad and Asher are born. Crazy stuff, right? And then something else crazy happens. During wheat harvest, Reuben, who's now old enough to be, out in the fields, so years are passing here. Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." I mean, who says that the Bible isn't interesting? So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. I like what one commentator said. He called these mandrakes love plants. These mandrakes were love plants because apparently they believed back in that day that these plants helped with fertility. Apparently, though, Leah didn't need it because she bears 2 more sons. Her 5th and her 6th son, Issachar and Zebulun, and she even has a daughter named Dinah. And then Rachel finally has a son, Joseph. And we'll talk about him a lot in the next few weeks. And so after all this, Jacob asks Laban to send him and his family on their way. I mean, he's got a pretty big family right at this point. But Laban doesn't want to send Jacob on his way because it seems that God has blessed Laban while Jacob has been there. Since Jacob has been there and been working for him, Laban's livestock has increased and he's prospered. So Jacob agrees to stay around and to work some more, to take care of the flock, if he can have all the spotted sheep, the dark-colored lambs, and the speckled goats. So he separates them out, so that he can tell his flock from Laban's flock. Laban agrees. And now, what we read next, we're not necessarily sure exactly what's going on. It's another really strange story. But it seems that Jacob schemed up some kind of plan to get his flocks to be more fruitful than Laban's flocks. Some think that maybe even possibly using the love plants, these mandrakes that Rachel used earlier in the chapter. And it works. In this way, the man grew exceedingly more prosperous and came to own large flocks, talking about Jacob here, female and male servants and camels and donkeys. On to Genesis chapter 31, where we read that Jacob, his entire family and livestock, they take off. They flee from Laban to return to Canaan. When Laban's away, he's out in his fields, he's unaware, they take off. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling them he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. Rachel's becoming like her husband. Jacob still hasn't learned his lesson, right? He's still a deceiver. He left Canaan 20 years ago because of his deception. He's fleeing for his life because of deception. And now, 20 years later, he's still on the run. He's headed back to Canaan, and he's fleeing from Laban because of his deception. When Laban discovers Jacob has taken off with his daughters and his grandkids, he takes off in pursuit. He finally catches up with them. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me. You've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music and of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you. But last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you've gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" He doesn't know that Rachel took the household idols. Why would she do that? Why would Rachel want to take the household idols? Was she still worshiping them? Maybe not. So he insists that Jacob insists that none of them have stolen the idols. He doesn't know about it. If you find these idols and you find the person that has stolen the idols, then you can put them to death. So Laban enters Rachel's tent to search. Of course, she has the idols. She's taken them and she's hidden them under her camel's saddle and she's sitting on them. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. Crazy story, right? Just keeps getting crazier. And so the chapter ends with a final confrontation between the two deceivers, Jacob and Laban. They set up stone pillars. They make a covenant with one another, and they have a meal together. But there's still a whole lot of distrust between the two. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other." And it's really strange that this verse is sometimes used in weddings and different Christian ceremonies. Have you ever heard this verse used for Christian ceremonies? It's not necessarily the great a good verse to use for ceremonies. It's talking about distrusting someone. Basically, Laban is saying to Jacob, I don't trust you at all. May God or the gods hold you accountable while I'm away from you, because I don't trust you in the least. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. And that's the end of that chapter. More crazy stories from the lives of the patriarchs and their families, right? Crazy. But here are some lessons that I learned. The first one's this: we reap what we sow. And we all know that, right? Deception, favoritism, jealousy, lying, stealing, distrust. And this is just a messy story, right? But it's not just a story. I mean, we read it as if it's a story, but these were real people. Real people with real pain, reaping the consequences of their sin. I mean, we can just summarize these stories here in a few minutes. You can go and you can read these stories. Read these 3 chapters. It might take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most. But they were making their decisions in the moment, right? I mean, like we all do, making decisions in the moment, not thinking about the consequences that would come from their actions later down the road. Paul said in his letter to the Galatians, don't be misled. No one makes a fool of God. What a person plants, he will harvest. The person who plants selfishness, ignoring the needs of others, ignoring God, harvests a crop of weeds. All he'll have to show for his life is weeds. But the one who plants in response to God, letting God's Spirit do the growth work in him, harvests a crop of real life, eternal life. Don't be misled. No one makes a fool of God. In another translation, God is not mocked. This is how God set up his world to work. But don't blame him, because he's given us a certain amount of dominion over our lives. Freedom alongside his sovereignty. I like how Old Testament scholar John Walton puts it. God is intimately involved, but not micromanaging. God is intimately involved, but not micromanaging. We will reap the consequences of our actions, of our decisions. And that is really sobering. It's really sobering to think about. But you know what's even more sobering? We not only reap what we sow, we reap what others sow, and others reap what we sow. The deceit and mistrust dealt and received by Jacob and his father-in-law, and then Rachel followed right in Laban's footsteps. I mean, what a masterful deception with those idols, right? I mean, she learned from the best. Think about Leah's hurt and pain. She was just a pawn, being used by her dad, rejected by Jacob. Jacob, he was just demonstrating the same kind of favoritism that he witnessed with his parents. And then he's going to continue, as we'll see over the next 3 chapters, with his sons. And all of this results in a whole lot of conflict, a whole lot of pain and hurt. We don't know much about the servants in the story, Bilhah, Zilpah. What do you think they experienced? Well, we don't know. The text doesn't say, but we do know that they were human beings, right? Used as objects because of the insecurity and jealousy of Rachel and Leah. Do you think Rachel and Leah heard about the story of their grandfather and grandmother-in-law, Abraham and Sarah, and how they did the same thing? How they used their servant in order to have children? What a great idea. It didn't go well for them either. Such conflict, such relational strife. They were reaping the mess. You know who else was reaping the mess? The people in their lives. the ones they were most closest to. The family mess just continues as the kids reap the consequences. They end up doing the same things, making the same mistakes, committing the same sins as their parents. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, their 12 sons, and we're going to get to all that. Patterns of sin, misguided behavior, self-centeredness, complete disregard for others. It's just one big cycle. It's one big cycle of deception and lies and mistrust. And once again, it's sobering to think about, but we are sowing into the lives of others. We are sowing into the lives of others. Our conversations, our interactions, the choices we make, our actions have consequences, not only for us, but for the people in our lives, especially those who are closest to us. And so before we move on, I'm going to invite the worship team to come up, and it will get better. I mean, it's like I said, this is sobering and difficult to think about. But we're going to spend some time right now in prayer and reflection, because I think we all have to look back sometimes in order to move forward. So I want to take some time right now to look back. And I think we need to lament, truly lament our sin, the pain that we've caused ourselves and others. And I think we can learn from it. I think we can learn from it. We lament, we learn, we repent, truly repent, and then move forward. So just spend some time right now reflecting, praying. We can't change the past, so we can't stay in the past. We have to move forward. And so the next question that I want to ask is, what seeds are you sowing now? What seeds are you sowing right now? Because rarely do we stop in the midst of life and reflect on our current actions. We usually wait. We look back later with regret. But what decisions are you currently making? What actions are you taking? What kind of words have you been sowing? You have an opportunity right now, an opportunity to course correct, to make things right, to make different decisions, to head in a different direction. So spend some time reflecting. What seeds are you currently sowing? What changes do you need to make? So we all experience the messes of life, right? At various times, in various ways. Messes of our own making and messes of others. And I think sometimes it feels like the cycle is just never going to end. Will the cycle ever end? Is there any hope? We just sang about it. You see, God can work in the mess, through the mess, and in spite of the mess. He can. He can work in the mess, through the mess, and in spite of the mess. Jacob learned the hard way, but he eventually learned. God used all of this to form his character. He used the pain that he caused and the pain caused by others to ultimately bring about his transformation. And next week, we're going to talk about his transformation. And what a crazy family this was. And we can't get past that, right? What a crazy, messed up family. All the deceit, the lying, the stealing, the jealousy, the self-centeredness, their wrong views of God, even idol worship. That didn't stop God. God brought his blessing to the world through this crazy family. And Jesus was a part of this crazy family. God was able to work through that mess. And if he was able to work through that mess, he can work through my mess. And he can work through your mess. And he can work through the mess that we see sometimes in the church today. He can work through the mess that we see all around us in the world. It's not a problem for God. It's not a problem for him. We reap what we sow. We do. We reap what we sow. But that doesn't have to be the end of our story. God can use all of that to bring about transformation in your lives and in the lives of others through you. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he said, God, who got you started in this spiritual adventure, shares with us the life of his Son and our Master Jesus. He will never give up on you. Never forget that. He shares with us the life of his Son. He shares with us the life of his Son. Will the cycle never end? Will it ever end? That's what the cross was all about. At the cross, Jesus ended the cycle. And at the cross, Jesus reaped all of what humanity had sown upon himself. He took all of that mess upon himself. Your mess and my mess and the mess of the world. And he came out victorious. And God shares with us the life of his Son. In Christ only. Only in Christ. We can come out victorious as well. So this, which we've been sharing together every week, this represents our victory. The victory that was won for us on our behalf. Victory over the mess. This represents the victory over the mess.